How to use volumes to add depth to your scenes. This scene is very large, but the foreground and background are fighting for attention. In the real world, we have an atmosphere, which is scattering light, making faraway objects appear with less contrast. Let's emulate this in Blender. Add a cube and create a new material. In this shader editor, delete the principled node and add a volume scatter node. Connect it to the volume material output. Scale the cube up to engulf the entire scene. I usually make it flat, but wide, barely engulfing the high structures. Right now we can't see anything. The volume is too dense. Drag the density slider to lighten the fog. You will see that the desired values are really low. To make it easier for us to drag the slider, let's create a little helper node. Add a converter, math node, and set it to multiply. Set the lower value to 0.001 and connect the output to the density of the volume scatter node. No dragging is feasible again. Find a setting which softens the scene background, but does not obstruct it too much. The anisotropy setting can then be used to create a stronger gradient towards the light sources, making the volume look much nicer. I usually take values between 0.5 and 0.8, depending on the light situation. Please don't hesitate to play around with the volume functions and the color. You can create really striking moods with bold decisions in here. For now I'll keep it simple and don't change these parameters. Our scene has some fog now, but mostly affecting the far away regions. The foreground looks boring and is barely touched by the thin volume. We can solve this with the second volume, which gradually thickens based on the height. This creates a beautiful effect near the ground. Add another cube. In edit mode, move it up by 1 unit or meter to have the object origin at the bottom of the cube. Add another volume material in the same way as we did before. Now we need the gradient, which affects the density based on the height. We can use the texture coordinate node for this. By shift and control clicking on the node, you can see a preview of the coordinates. It's a colorful mess right now, and it's not clear what we actually need. Add a separate XYZ node and plug it into the generated output. You can shift control click the separate XYZ node and see that the Z output gives a nice gradient from top to the bottom. To use this with our density input, duplicate the multiply node and plug it between the Z output and our little helper node. Now you can see that there's a fall off on the volume, but upside down. To solve this, simply create a color invert node and put it after the separate XYZ node. Now the volume should be dense at the bottom and thin at the top. Snap the cube to the bottom of your scene and simply scale it up to contain your scene. In my case, I keep it only in the deep trench area. Play around with the settings in the volume scatter to get a good looking result. With these two volumes, you can now create very convincing scenes and have full control over where exactly you need the fog to create depth. If you struggle to render the volumes in an acceptable time, please have a look at my denoising tutorial, which can be used to only denoise the volumes, reducing the render times a lot. You can download this scene on my Patreon. Happy blending!